So I think the Freedom of Information Act is one of the best kept secrets. My bread and butter is really looking at a company's relationship with their customers. You could take two public companies with the same exact financial metrics, but the one that's loved by their customers, that could probably increase prices, that has a lot of brand loyalty, is worth so much more than the one that's hated by its customers, and it's going to face a lot of churn, and it's going to have a lot of problems with growth going forward. Even if the financials look identical, the customer sentiment really impacts the value. So I got in a big fight with this publicly traded company called Care.com. It's a platform where parents can go to find babysitters. There have been a few cases where a baby had died under the care of a Care.com babysitter. I see a little bit of early stage litigation, parents who claim they paid for background checks, but then got babysitters with criminal histories. So I try to sign up to test their process as Harvey Weinstein. And I thought there's no way I get approved. They're obviously going to catch me. And to my amazement, hello, Harvey, you've been approved. I go on there and I get extra verified. They're not checking anything. I document it all. I write a little article. The stock falls a little. A board member resigned the next day. It gets some media attention, but it doesn't go super viral. And that would have likely been the end of it. Except the company decides to fight back.
Welcome to The Peel, where we explore the world's greatest startup stories. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital, a venture capital firm that loves submitting FOIA requests. Today, I talked to Edwin Dorsey, author of The Bear Cave, a newsletter exposing publicly traded companies that are misleading investors or harming customers. Edwin has a fascinating story. We go through numerous case studies like Planet Fitness, Hershey's, and most notably, Edwin's 2-year battle with Care.com that exposed criminal babysitters on the platform responsible for the deaths of 8 children, ending with a front page story in the Wall Street Journal, most of the management team resigning, and the company ultimately being acquired a few months later. This set the stage for The Bear Cave, and Edwin takes us inside how his 7-figure business works, all his methods for discovering companies that are acting badly, like common corporate red flags, and using FOIA requests to discover customer insights. Now, normally, this is a very positive podcast. We cover startups and how to build them. But Edwin's research is surprisingly relevant for startup founders. Our conversation is almost 2 hours long, going very deep into his research process, and I think you'll come away with a new perspective on ethical business practices and finding holes in the market where customers aren't being served. Let's talk to Edwin after a quick word from our sponsors.
The tech world turns to the Brave browser for its unbeatable privacy protections. But did you know that Brave also has a private ad platform? Brave Ads offers first-party targeting, and it's been cookieless since day one, so you can relax while third-party tracking cookies disappear from the web. Today, millions of people turn to ad blockers to avoid being tracked and pestered online. But Brave's new ad model aligns incentives for users and advertisers. Users earn rewards for viewing ads, which they can save, spend, or pass along to their favorite creators. And advertisers score points for respecting user privacy, generating ROI without invasive tracking. So whether it's high-impact announcements on the new tab page or keyword-targeted ads in Brave Search offers diverse, private, future-proof ad formats for all your business goals. Join the future of advertising at brave.com/ads. Mention Turpentine to get 25% off your first campaign. This episode is brought to you by Warp. If you're a founder with employees in multiple states, you know managing state tax compliance is complicated. Warp not only automates state tax compliance, but also offers a user-friendly experience tailored to the needs of startups with a robust in-house team of experts. Warp ensures your startup remains compliant across all 50 states, giving you the peace of mind you need to focus on scaling your business. They also make it easy for startups to provide health benefits for employees, hire international contractors, and even claim R&D tax credits. Hundreds of startups trust Warp to handle their payroll and compliance needs. You can go from zero to payroll live in just 2 days. Don't let payroll and compliance hold your startup back. Visit joinwarp.com/peel or tap the link in the description. Get started and receive a $1,000 gift card when you run your very first payroll. That's joinwarp.com/peel.
Edwin, welcome to the show.
Turner, thanks so much for having me on The Peel. It's an honor to be here, and you've had so many great guests in the past, so I'm really excited.
You're another one. We're adding you to the list of great guests. So I think we're going to talk about short selling, what that is, how it works. We're going to talk about the Bear Cave, your newsletter, your business that you run, and then just like talk through case studies. helping people understand like how different companies work and like find opportunities to maybe find companies that are not quite following all the rules or all the laws. So kind of starting it, can you just explain to us what short selling is for somebody who doesn't know?
Absolutely, Turner. So short selling is one way for a person to bet against a publicly traded company. Mechanically, it works. I'll see a stock trading at 100. I'll borrow a share from somebody. I'll sell it at 100, and I need to buy it back at a future date. So if the stock falls to 80, I sell it at 100. I buy it back a few months later at 80. I return the share to the original holder, and I profit the difference at $20. The problem with short selling is that the stock goes up, you could be forced to buy it back at a much higher price. So if the stock doubles or more than doubles, you'll lose more than the original amount you shorted. So it's this high risk strategy where you can lose an infinite amount in theory and earn money when the stock falls. The reason it's important or kind of relevant for the markets today is short sellers uniquely have a financial incentive to root out bad conduct. So there's big hedge funds that'll short passively and sit on their hands and just make a bet. But more and more, we've seen this trend of activist short sellers, people who will take a big short position, shorting the stock or through options by buying puts, do deep research on a company's problems, and then try to expose them and bring them to light. You know, they function almost like media organizations where they'll release big reports, highlight consumer problems, highlight potential fraud. Short sellers have a big incentive to provide tips to the media on issues that are going wrong. They can also work closely with the regulators. So short sellers are part of this like ecosystem to root out bad conduct by going to regulators and giving tips, or sometimes even formal whistleblower tips where they can make money exposing fraud by publishing big reports on bad conduct. And just one of the few people who have like a real financial incentive to find the badness in the market and try to expose it and stop it early.
Yeah, and it's not like you're trying to sabotage a company. You're basically finding bad businesses, bad practices. They're screwing people over. They're breaking the law. Like you're trying to contribute to like a healthy economic system and financial markets, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. A great example is Jim Chanos. You know, in 1999, 2000, he was the first kind of big whistleblower on Enron. It wasn't regulators that shut Enron down. The journalists were giving a lot of skepticism, and he was the one person all the journalists would go to and provide quotes and kind of explain what's going on. So there's tons of examples from history where short sellers were the first ones to kind of highlight problems at a company. And of course, when it collapses, the short sellers get blamed. They say, you caused the collapse, but that's never really true. If anything, they caused it to collapse sooner than it otherwise would have, and it would have harmed a ton more people if a fraud was going on longer.
Yeah, it's like Enron was literally like they were doing like multiple very illegal things. It's like if they just wouldn't have done it in the first place, no one would have shorted the stock, or it wouldn't have ran up either. It was like, wasn't it one of the most valuable companies in the US at the peak? Like it was like 100 billion or something like that. I forget the exact number, but
Enron was massive, and it was also, people forget, very well loved. Enron had a policy of donating 1% of their annual revenue to charity,
which was fake. It was fake revenue.
Fraudulent companies, as they try to paint themselves in a good light. So there's literally articles, you go back to 2001, all these charities are going to suffer because they won't get their Enron donations, a huge loss for the Houston area. A more recent example was Wirecard, where I think the biggest fintech company in all of Germany was Wirecard, and this was tens of billions of dollars of market cap. And there's just no substance there. The entire fabric of the business, 80% of it or something, just didn't exist. And the parts that did exist were very scammy and questionable. So we see this time and time throughout history where short sellers are the first one to kind of raise issues of the conduct.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said about the benefits to a portfolio. Like if you, let's just say you run an endowment for university or a pension that's paying these teachers their pension payments after they've retired that they've contributed to for their entire career. If the stock market goes down by 30%, that has a big impact on the pool that you have to pay out of the portfolio. But if you have some exposure in the portfolio that actually the value goes up, if you're short, that helps build a more diversified, defensible portfolio. It's good to have some short exposure.
Yeah, the biggest benefit for hedge funds that like to short is it allows you to get more long. You can invest $1 in a hedge fund, and they just invest $1 in other companies. And let's say they're really good, they can earn 20% a year. Or they can go long and short, where they might invest $2, hedge it with $1 worth of shorts, and now they can get twice as much long exposure, make a ton of money on their longs, and maybe make money on their shorts or maybe break even. But it allows you to get more long in theory without taking too much more market risk. Short sellers are also kind of uniquely positioned to be buying stocks when they go down. So in a financial crisis, 2008, 2009, the market falls by 80%. There's not a lot of natural buyers that can provide liquidity and help price discovery. However, short sellers, if you sold at the top, they're going to be the natural buyers kind of providing some liquidity when no one else is there. It's a little far removed from what I do, because in the bear cave, I have this policy of not even shorting, but I cover a lot of short sellers. So it's something that's relevant to me, but not something I really practice myself.
Yeah, well, so I think an interesting topic now is, how do you discover or figure out if a company should be shorted in the first place? If they're overvalued, let's say, or if they're breaking the law, some kind of misconduct, mistreating their customers. Just like, what is the process for unearthing this stuff?
So this is exactly what I do day in and day out. Usually it starts very simply. I'm on Twitter and somebody will tag me. I get a ton of inbound tips because of my newsletter, where people are trying to get things on my radar. Every week, 20, 30 tips of things I should look into. So there's this constant flow. And one of the first things I'll do when researching a company is just go to their website. And if it doesn't make sense, that's a big red flag.
So what's an example of that?
I was looking into a company called OppFi, and you go to the website and they're talking about financial literacy and improving people's credit scores and ESG and next generation finance. And I just couldn't figure out what they did. What do they do? So I go to Edgar, I read their SEC filings, 2 pages in. We're a payday lender and our average interest rates are 143%. It's okay. Why don't you just make that clear on your website and on investor page? And when you don't do that, that's kind of problematic. Or there was a no revenue trucking startup, Embark Trucking, that was trying to make software for self-driving trucks. And they said they had the best technology. They're going to have billions of dollars of revenue in a few years. And you just open up their SEC filings and they have no patents and no proprietary IP. And all their competitors have hundreds of patents. And it's, hey, I'm not sure I'm buying what you're selling here. It just doesn't make sense at a basic level. So that's one thing I look at. Another common thread I see in these companies that get ahead of themselves that could be good potential shorts I want to write up in the newsletter is heavy retail investor participation. And you really see this in the smaller market caps, so maybe $500 million to $5 billion market caps. If the companies are catering a lot to retail investors, if just retail investors are talking a lot about it on social media or Wall Street bets, that alone isn't disqualifying, but it could be a sign the stock's getting ahead of itself. Or you kind of have a naive investor base that won't be picking up on problems that you should notice. I also look, markets rely heavily on company disclosures. What is a company saying about its own business? Anytime I see irregular disclosures that aren't in line with peer institutions, that could be very problematic.
So what's an irregular disclosure? Just if someone, I'm actually not really sure what that might be, but just for someone who doesn't never heard that word before.
So of the most important disclosure for any public company, there's a lot, but one of them is revenue recognition. When do you recognize revenue? And there's a few basic terms that are met. You recognize revenue when the product is shipped, when you have a contract, when you believe you're going to be paid, and so on and so forth. If a company changes that, then that's a sign that they might be trying to recognize revenue more aggressively. And, if they're starting to sell on consignment or to related party distributors, or they have a policy that no one else has, something that I do is I don't just read the SEC filings to find a company's disclosures. I'll also use this tool called the SEC Full Text Search Tool that lets you search through all the last 24 years of SEC filings for all public companies and see if the company's disclosure is used by any other company.
Like that specific sentence structure and that series of words.
Exactly. Because normally you expect auditors to have a certain level of disclosure and use the same kind of boilerplate language. You
copy paste.
Exactly. But if you have a disclosure that nobody else has, then that why are you being so different than your entire peer group? So that could be a sign that something's wrong. Obviously, companies that go through SPACs get a lot more attention. And then my bread and butter is really looking at a company's relationship with their customers and trying to see if they have like a healthy, positive relationship and customers like them, or they have a very antagonistic relationship and customers are pissed off. Because I like to say you could take two public companies with the same exact financial metrics, but the one that's loved by their customers, that could probably increase prices, that has a lot of brand loyalty, is worth so much more than the one that's hated by its customers, and it's going to face a lot of churn, and it's going to have a lot of problems with growth going forward. Even if the financials look identical, the customer sentiment really impacts the value over time.
Yeah, that's true. And that's kind of almost like the intangible X factor of being a good investor, is deciphering some of that stuff. Because like anyone can run a screen, pull some metrics, compare them, and be like, oh, this PE ratio or this revenue multiple is this, and it's higher or lower, and like industry comps is this, and like it's undervalued or it's overvalued. But to your point, it's like, yeah, this company is like, they could triple pricing. Like I think an interesting example we see play out is something like a Netflix or a Spotify. So like I think what I see, people have been very critical. Spotify, super low gross margins, but then it's like, right, they keep increasing their prices and people are paying it. So obviously that's going to, like, it's hard to know how that's going to play out in the future. And it's kind of like having an opinion on that, or figuring out, like, could Spotify charge $50 a month and no one would churn? I think they charge like 15 or something. Like that'd be really big impact on their business. And obviously they're not going to increase prices right away, but it's like, could they get there over 10 years? And that's how the stock is like $1 trillion company or whatever in 10 years. I don't know. But like, that's the thing you got to decide if you're an investor.
To give you one example, where Spotify can be frustrating getting those $2 a month price increases every 6 months, I don't view that as that egregious or predatory, even though it probably frustrates to some people. I look for really the most egregious examples in the market. So 3 years ago, there was a company that went public called Root Insurance. And their whole gimmick was they're going to be car insurance, but they can have better underwriting skills because they have you download an app, and this app on your phone communicates your cell phone data for a week while you're driving. So they can see how fast you drive, the areas of drive, the times of day you drive, how fast you turn, all this stuff.
That sounds like great tech, right? Like, oh, they're probably great underwriting.
Better at underwriting, and they can do that to only underwrite good drivers and give you better rates. That's the whole pitch, and the market's loving it, and it's not profitable, but everyone says this is going to be a huge thing. Telematics, such a smart idea. Root Insurance, buy. All the tech investors love it. And they do give you better rates than the competitors. That's kind of how they grow. And I just looked online, and there's a lot of complaints around the cancellation, the pricing, but online complaints, who knows, maybe it's a competitor sabotaging. So I do what I normally do is I send FOIA requests to state regulators for consumer complaints on businesses. And what I found is, even in the pandemic, over and over again, people would say, I got a Root Insurance policy for 6 months. I barely drove. Everyone in the pandemic wasn't driving. I had no accidents. But 6 months in, they hiked my prices 60%. And this was at a time in the pandemic where auto regulators were pressuring companies to not raise prices, because it's predatory. No one's getting in accidents in the pandemic because no one's driving. There's no need to raise prices. But Root Insurance alone was the one raising prices across the board, 30, 40, 50% on consumers. And then in line with raising the prices really aggressively at a time when nobody else was, they also made it incredibly tough to cancel. And I'd see all these like painful complaints from old people, or, a lot of times low income or Spanish speakers saying, we just can't figure out how to cancel. And we keep getting these price hikes up the wazoo. And, we didn't expect this at all. They said they wouldn't raise prices unless there was an accident. They're not following their word. And so I could see this big customer problem where, on the other side, the financials look better. They're telling the market our underwriting strategy is working. If you look at our cohort metrics, we keep getting more profitable. In particular, this state that's so good. And I just know it's not because you're underwriting, it's because you're raising prices a ton and customers are begging to cancel. And long story short, I think they had like record churn. 60% of people would cancel after a year. The product just didn't work, and the stock ended up falling 90% plus from the IPO. It's those types of stories where I like to say that you can do things in the short run, such as raising prices, that really help the financial metrics of the business, while in the long run destroying the value of the business. So you can do things that help the financials that hurt the actual value of the business. But Wall Street isn't good at figuring that out. Wall Street likes to model and is very quantitative, where me and the bear cave focus a lot on the qualitative business relationship with the customer.
A lot of people ask me, like, if you like investing, why are you not like, hedge fund person or something? I'm just like, I cannot out spreadsheet, out model someone. Like I know how to do it, but that's not what I'm good at. So I'm not going to be better than you at that. So it's like, that's their bread and butter, like you said. So you mentioned something I thought was really interesting. The Freedom of Information Act, that's what it's called, a request. So can you explain what that is and like how to do it? Because I think people listening, they might be like, oh, I'd like to get some of this information on different companies that might be interesting that I'm researching or maybe competing against or like trying to get startup ideas from.
Yeah, so I think the Freedom of Information Act is one of the best kept secrets, in the public markets, and is very, very relevant for your listeners. And it's something I do a ton.
And can you do it for private companies also? Like it's any business, right?
You can totally do it for private companies. I do it a lot for public companies because that's what my newsletter focuses on, but you can totally do it for private companies of any size. You can do it for anything. But what the Freedom of Information Act is, it's a set of laws that give citizens the right to request official government records from regulators. Typically, it's used a lot by journalists. So how do journalists get internal emails from governments? They'll go to a government regulator and say, hey, we want all the emails that use this word or between this person. It's used a lot by journalists. It's used less by people building companies, although I think it can be just as valuable. The way I use the Freedom of Information Act in my newsletter is I go to state level regulators. So think state attorneys general offices, maybe the Illinois Attorney General or the New York Attorney General, someone like that. And you find who their FOIA officer is. And typically they have a process for submitting FOIA requests. It might be a portal. It might be sending a letter to a certain address. It might be an email address. You can tell which ones are okay with FOIA requests and which ones try to deter it by how difficult they make it for you.
Okay.
Some people are like, print out this form and mail it to this PO box, but it varies a lot by state. And I go to the state regulator and I say, could I please have all consumer complaints filed with your office against this company from this date to this date? So it needs to be a specific request that they can process. And typically it'll vary by state. Within a week to 6 months, again, varying by state, they'll send me a PDF of all the consumer complaints filed against that company. And that's really integral to my research process because it allows me to see how egregious a company's issues are and not just speculate, but then I can actually show the documents to readers. I know some of your past guests who have been in media say readers really like documents. And that's really what I found with the Bear Cave. People don't like saying this company is scammy. They want you to show like how it's going on, show the letter somebody wrote to a regulator. Because if you show, an 80-year-old writing a handwritten letter to a regulator saying, I just keep getting scammed by this company, I can't figure out how to cancel, that's so much more impactful than just saying, oh, they have a complaint rate 20% higher than competitors. So that's how I use FOIA. I go to state level regulators for consumer complaints. An easy way for anybody looking to build a business would be just to FOIA the FTC. And the FTC, you can just submit an email to the right person, look up their FOIA office, and you just need a specific request. I want all records from this date to this date that mention this word or this company. And typically within a few weeks or a month, you'll get either Excel spreadsheet or PDF with all the consumer complaints. And it's a very good way to see what the types of problems a company's facing are. And I'm surprised it's not used a lot by Wall Street. I'm surprised it isn't used a lot by company builders. It's low cost. It takes some time. Maybe there's a little bit of expertise needed into figuring out how to wording the FOIA request. In the Bear Cave, I have this annual Christmas list. You can just Google it. And I have a mock FOIA template that I shared with people that they could use for the FTC. I think it's really valuable. There's all this information stored with regulators about problems consumers are having, but it's more or less inaccessible unless you know how to use FOIA. And that's hugely valuable. And it's good for the world for everybody to know what consumers are complaining about and the pain points they're having.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think what I'll do is I'll find that. I'll throw a link in the show notes for people to check out. If that sounds interesting, scroll down, you'll find it. And I know you have a couple good examples of like some case studies where you've done FOIA requests. We'll hit on them in a little bit. One of the things I wanted to ask you is just generally, what's a common corporate misconduct or like red flag? Like what are some things that you kind of commonly see companies that are not behaving in the right way or committing fraud or acting unethically? Like what are some common things that like behaviors, or maybe like we talked about changing revenue recognition was one. So I know like I think didn't Enron like they'd sign a contract and they'd like recognize the entire multi-year value of the contract like in the revenue for that year or something like that. Like, so, and that's one like insane example of like a very extreme, but what other kind of red flags do you look for or kind of notice a lot?
So a big thing in any company that's either scammy or promotional or fraudulent, you can look for is management turnover. So typically management isn't going to blow the whistle on a company they join. But if you see a CFO join and then leave 2 months later, effective immediately, and doesn't even have another job lined up, that's a very, very, very big red flag. If you see an auditor resign for no reason, I pay a lot of attention to these nuances. If there's a board member with a lot of experience on public company boards and they join and they leave, if you have a board that's really weak, meaning that they're a big company, but you don't see board members of the expected caliber, that could be a big red flag. I with the Bear Cave, focus a lot more on the qualitative aspects of a business rather than quantitative. So I don't do this accounting, accounts receivable or ballooning and stuff such as that. I focus a lot on the company relationship with their customers. So I might look at an auto billing policy. Is this policy tough to cancel? Is it tougher to cancel to peers? Does it just seem unfair? Are they raising prices very aggressively? And then it's just things that don't make sense. So you look at the investor deck and they say they have there was a company called CuriosityStream that went public through a SPAC. And they said they had like a streaming service and they said their content library is worth $2 billion. But I couldn't figure out how they got it. They didn't acquire it. They didn't do R&D. And I looked at their website and they have 2,000 videos and the average video length is 5 minutes. It's YouTube level quality. I'm just doing the math. And so you're valuing your content at $1 million video and the average length is 5 minutes. This makes no sense. So, there's tons of ways of just pulling out information that I'm good at. Those are some of the things I look at. I really, really do value the customer relationship with their companies. I'll read all the complaints on SiteJabber, on Trustpilot, on Better Business Bureau. And I think to an outsider, it can be tough to decipher what's just noise and what's actually valid. But when you do this all the time, day in, day out for hundreds of companies, I think you'd start to develop a spidey sense when something is very wrong.
That's fair. And I just think about like, how does the average investor value company? It's the free cash flow that it generates and you slap a multiple on it, whatever, that's what it's worth. But that cash comes from revenue. There's margins on the revenue they generate that comes from the customer. It's like if a customer, do they make one purchase and they never come back? Do they make 1,000 purchases and they come back every day? And they're like annuity stream. They're just like there's constant cash coming into the business because they like serve their customers so well. It's so hard to decipher that just from looking at financials. So I agree. I generally describe my process as being a little bit more qualitative than quantitative. So one question, like, are there industries or certain types of companies that you feel like just always come up with these issues?
We might have talked about this little gold miners and just miners in general. There's a Mark Twain quote that a mine is a hole in the ground with a liar on top. You see this all the time, because it's just so easy to lie. We have a deposit. We think it's this valuable. Oh, it didn't turn out to be the case, but thanks for giving us all your money. So that's a common thing. Crypto has a ton. I recently wrote on a company, DeFi Technologies. They have about $500 million market cap and they claim to do crypto ETFs. And you just do a basic thing like look up their address and it's a very small office space and you see what other companies use that address and like 10 other stock and dump promotional gold mines, cannabis companies, whatever, all use that address and they've all failed. And now there's a supposedly successful crypto company at the same address. It just makes no sense. I tend to focus a lot on consumer-oriented businesses and tech businesses because I'm allowed to file those FOIA requests. I like to look at the audience a company caters to. So generally, the people being scammed aren't middle and high income earners with education. Generally, the people being scammed are low-income people who are non-English speakers, people who are just wouldn't be as effective at standing up for themselves and wouldn't be maybe taken as seriously by regulators and governments. And so if I see a company catering to that population, then I really, really want to, at least for me, dig in and see how egregious the problems are. So a payday lender would be one. And the thing is with payday lenders, if they market themselves as a payday lender, the market will adjust for the regulatory risk and the consumer risk in payday lending, and they'll trade at 2 times earnings. Because everybody knows payday lenders tend to not last a long time. They tend to have a very shaky banking relationship, and they ultimately get shut down or fined a ton of money. But if you're like an OpFi and you misrepresent yourself and you say, no, we're better than a payday lender, we're a consumer finance and it's actually just a payday lender, then you have kind of this arbitrage where I can say, look, the market's valuing it like this, but it's not. The market's valuing Root Insurance like an amazing tech company. It's actually just a scammy insurance company. The market's valuing, so that is really what I focus on when it's catering to those demographics and the company's misrepresenting itself. SPACs, anything that goes public through a SPAC, that tends to be
instant qualification.
It's a method of going public that, is very, very sketchy. So for me, I tend to focus more on tech and consumer stuff, not because that's where the scammiest behavior is, but it's where I'm best at digging. There's a lot in drug development where people will say this drug has great properties, it's going to be approved, whatever. I'm just not good at the analysis there. I can't add to, there's not much FOIA can do. There's not so much Googling can do there. You need like an expertise of reading the studies and such. So that's somewhere I might struggle a little bit. But generally, tech and consumer, $1 to $10 billion companies that are having some, disclosure issues or bad relationship with their customers, that's where I like to focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably see a lot in that category too, just in the private markets, companies that are valued between 1 and 10 billion, tech companies.
There's a lot more at the lower market cap ranges too. The reason I kind of do 1 to 10 billion is below $1 billion, people just don't care. I can show that a $20 million public company is a complete scam and is going to go to zero. There's no way for someone to make money with that. The stock, you generally can't short it. It just, no one cares. And above $10 billion, there might be misconduct, but it's generally not the super, super, super egregious type stuff that you would want to see that will lead to a company declining 80%. It might be a division, it might be a slight issue, but above $10 billion, generally enough very smart people have vetted you and given you their seal of approval that there's nothing crazy going on. But there's rare exceptions.
Yeah, it's like a small company no one cares about versus, let's say you come out and say, what's like one of the most valuable companies in the world, Google. They're getting disrupted by AI. And their revenue should be cut in half. The company should trade at $100 instead of $1,000 or whatever. It doesn't even matter how good the analysis is if it's going to be right. But there's hundreds of thousands of employees at Facebook are all going to read that and be like, yeah, like that's our rival. There's going to be so much more clicks and traffic on that. So like the incentives, and then even employees at Google, they're all going to read and be like, oh no, like should we leave? Should I look for a new job? So like that headline will get millions of clicks, and the incentives, the business model is like getting people to look at it, watch it versus some junior gold miner company in Canada that's worth $10 million. It's like clearly a fraud, but no one cares.
It kind of speaks to traditional media versus maybe the Substack ecosystem, where the traditional media optimizes for number of clicks and number of eyeballs, partly because you make your money based on advertisement shows, based on the number of clicks. Where in Substack, I think if I wrote a frivolous piece on a $500 billion company and just said, oh, this thing is Google going down 80%, AI, just bombastic and not well thought out, it would probably get a lot of clicks, but it would be terrible for my business because it would lead to a lot of paid subscriber churn. It would destroy the trust you have with readers. If you do that 3 or 4 times at a normal media outlet, you'd be booming and your boss would give you a raise. If you do that with Substack, you'd be struggling and all your subscribers would be canceling and asking for a refund.
Yeah, we've kind of seen in like the tech community right now, there's almost like pushback against mainstream media where a lot of their headlines are a little bit more negative. And really, if you're building a startup, it's really hard. The average day is like there's a lot of things that go wrong, and you need some optimism and you need people to make you feel good because the world's kind of against you. You maybe have two years of runway left and you're going to run out of money. So like you gotta get to cash flow break even, continue to build your business. Like you want positive things. And like you just get a ton of clicks if you go after people and talk negatively. So that's definitely something that's, especially in like the tech circles where people are like, we need just some more optimism. And with the state of kind of tech startup valuation job market, it's rough. Like it has been rough the last couple of years.
And I would say with the Bear Cave, obviously it's not a super optimistic publication because I am criticizing these companies, but I do try to differentiate myself in a huge way from other media outlets or even some activist short sellers where it's very understated. The title of every article is just problems at XYZ company. It's not anything inflammatory. It's not you're going to decline, not fraud, it's just problems at XYZ company. And then typically, I know you read some articles in the past, Turner. It's very, to me, understated and evidence-based. It's just, here's the quote from the filing. Here's a screenshot of the customer complaint. Here's another quote from a filing. Here's a quote from a lawsuit. Here's what some Glassdoor complaints are saying. Here's what the online chat. And just letting the reader decide for themselves. I think too much with the media, it's just them expressing their own opinion and having bombastic views, or you see this with some activist short financial analysis. You know, one person called GE the biggest fraud since Enron. It's like, what are you talking about? So other people are saying it's going to go down 80%, big red letters, 6 exclamation points. And I think readers are smart. I think readers more and more see through that. I think it does a disservice to readers. And if you're trying to build trust with the readership base, it's not a good way to operate. So it's very much the opposite of what I try to do. I don't want sensational headlines. I don't want sensational claims. It's very evidence-based and it's incredibly understated, where I want the reader to draw their own conclusions rather than me saying it's going to fall 90%, exclamation point, short now. Like that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, and I use some of the same research techniques just when I'm investing in startups. Like someone will be building like, I don't know, a company that competes against some publicly traded company. You know, you'll look at the Glassdoor and be like, "Ooh, a lot of people are complaining about this one thing, or they don't like working there," or you just see what like Wall Street thinks of the company. You see like what the general consensus is about their product. One that's kind of been fascinating me lately is Amazon. Like there's a lot of consumers that hate Amazon, right? Like there's so many complaints, but I mean, it's so hard to compete against them if you're a startup. So sometimes it's like really hard to just take like some thread of like there's some kind of issue or problem with a certain product and like instantly convert that to like, oh, I'm going to invest in a competing startup, or build something that competes against them. But there's always nuggets. And like, if you're always looking out for things, like maybe you get an idea of like, oh, you know, if I ever come across something and like, you know, if someone's working on this thing and like, oh yeah, I remember like there's a problem with that competitor. Like maybe this is like the hole in the market to dethrone them and build an even bigger company. One of the things I really want to get into is the Bear Cave, your newsletter, and just going back to sort of the beginning of it, like how you started it. It didn't actually start with the newsletter, right? It was like a company that you looked into.
Yeah, I would say, you know, to give the full story here, Turner, I've been passionate about stocks from a really young age. Second grade, I was all about the stock market. The transition to the short side happened freshman year of college, where I started getting, just by coincidence, introduced to two of the best short sellers out there. One was Mark Kokodes, who previously ran a big short-only fund and is now an independent short seller. And the other early mentor was Jim Carruthers, who my freshman year of college, I met him, and he was running $1 billion short-only fund called Sophos. And I started interning for him on and off all 4 years and kind of learned the ropes, researching companies. And the thing that got me a little bit of attention and led ultimately to the foundations of the Bear Cave was I got in a big fight with this publicly traded company called Care.com. And Care.com, Turner, for people who don't know, is a big babysitting platform. It's a platform where parents can go to find babysitters and babysitters can go to advertise their services to parents. And I was young, finished freshman year of college. Everyone knew I liked looking at stocks. And I had a friend who was a babysitter on there. And she said, you really should look into them. I think they have a lot of safety issues. It doesn't seem like they're doing the vetting they claim to be doing. So naturally, I start digging in. I look at all the local news reporting and I find safety issues where parents claim their babysitters had a DUI or was like not, you know, properly checked out. I see a little bit of early stage litigation from parents who claim they paid for background checks, but then got babysitters with criminal histories and that Care.com wasn't vetting these people. There'd been a few cases where like a baby had died under the care of a Care.com babysitter. So I want to check out their process themselves. They say they're vetting the babysitters. They say they're running background checks. So I try to sign up to test their process as Harvey Weinstein, who was in the news at the time. So
yeah, I remember that.
I used a photo of Harvey Weinstein. I used the email harveythebabysitter@gmail.com. I made up an address. I just pretended to be Harvey Weinstein. And I consented to the background check, and I documented all of this. And they said they'd get back to me within, 2 to 3 days. And I thought, there's no way I get approved. They're obviously going to catch me. They're going to ban my IP address. This is the easiest thing possible. And to my amazement, 2-3 days later, hello, Harvey, you've been approved. I go on there and just I get extra verified. I can be CPR certified. They're not checking anything. And, I do it a few more times as Daffy Duck and Donald Trump just to make sure it's not a fluke.
Yeah, just insane names. Yeah.
They're just not running their background checks. And, I documented all. I screenshot every part of the process. I write a little article, and it makes a little bit of a wave, Turner. The stock falls a little. A board member resigned the next day. It gets some media attention, but it doesn't go super viral, just a little. And that would have likely been the end of it. Except the company decides to fight back. The company sent a letter to my house, and my parents were freaking out. They called my college to try to get me in trouble, and a bunch of Care.com donors were also affiliated with Stanford, so they were able, I think, to pressure Stanford to go after me.
They tried to kick you out of school or something, right?
It didn't. It originally told me that I needed to take down my article because it violated Stanford's Wi-Fi policy, which made no sense. And they're like, you're violating their terms of service while using Stanford Wi-Fi, and people are complaining. Will you take it down? And I'm like, no. And they're like, and they say, oh, well, we could launch an ethics investigation. It could be and they're not explicitly telling me but they're pressuring me. And so it starts this, and then, I think it starts this outside of the bear cave, big frustration with me and Stanford. And I ultimately kind of start rebelling more against the institution. I even have a website, theymustresign.com, where I wrote a lot about my experience in criticizing the administration and trying to fight back. And now, I think partly due to my pressure, the president, the provost, and a lot of the administrators of Stanford are gone. And I think a lot of it started with this Care.com.
Wow.
Back to Care.com, Turner, I just I do the opposite of what they wanted. I start digging in more. I file FOIA requests for the first time to every single state regulator in the U.S., all 50 state attorney general.
This is your first FOIA request experience.
I do it first in their home state of Massachusetts. You want to go to their home state because that's where the most complaints are going to be. But then I go to every state, and I literally, that leads me to create an Excel file where I can track how quickly states respond, which ones require what. Some want your home address, some want you to be a citizen, whatever. I just get good at this process, and I get so many complaints. I get obsessive. I go to local police departments and the NYPD, and I say, can I have all 911 calls where Care.com is mentioned in the transcript? Because I thought maybe a mom was calling about a Care.com, but I just get obsessed with this company for 2 years. I write more articles. I ultimately cold email over 100 journalists to talk about the safety issues where babysitters with criminal histories are being approved, are being presented as safe to parents, and parents are using them, and their kids are dying.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. I mean, I have kids, and you don't someone is accused for sexual harassment on kids or whatever, or someone who's murdered someone or it's committing crimes around your kids. This is the last thing that you want, especially if you're paying money. Hey, let's just check that these people have a good history, and then they just skip it. That's a little outrageous.
I know no parent would ever want a sex offender watching their kids, yet that's what happens through Care.com. And the big problem is Care.com, in my view, should represent themselves as Craigslist for babysitters. If you hired someone off Craigslist, a parent would apply extra scrutiny and would look into the person's background. But when it comes to official Care.com and you're paying $30 a month and they claim to be doing background checks, you let your guard down a little when you shouldn't. And that's the real issue with them. And anyways, to kind of wrap up the story here, a few journalists get interested, one of whom was Gregory Zuckerman at the Wall Street Journal. I met with him. I explained the whole thing. He did a multi-month investigation, and it ends up there's a front page story in the Wall Street Journal. Care.com babysitters with criminal histories were hired and killed 8 children or so under their care. And that led to I got cited in the story. And more importantly, I've been obsessing over this company for 2 years on Twitter and with my entire social circle. So it gave me this validity as, oh, this kid knows what he's doing, which means when I started the newsletter my senior year in February 2020, people kind of cared what I had to say. I think for most, if you're just a college student and you say, I'm going to write a newsletter on corporate misconduct, they'll say, well, how are you qualified? You're too young. How do you know what's going on? But because I had this care.com experience, people said, oh, I kind of want to know what's the next care.com.
Yeah. And I think one other thing I remember seeing, wasn't the management team like starting to sell a bunch of shares too, right when this started happening? Like they're trying to get out.
Turner, you got a good memory. So yeah, there was a management team that was selling. And one point I tried to make is they were accusing me of market manipulation. And I say, well, you're selling stock right before a lot of this negative info comes out. You're manipulating. You have an incentive. You're selling hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock. I think insider selling, some people can overvalue it too much. I tend to focus a lot on if there's a pattern of selling. To me, if 5 different executives are selling 20% plus of their stock per month, that's a much bigger red flag than if one executive sells half their stock in a day. Because one person you don't know, maybe they're planning to leave, maybe they're having a divorce, maybe they're buying a house, and people value that too much. Where to me, it's more if there's a pattern, board members, executives, C-suite employees, if a lot of them are selling and none are buying, that's where I would apply a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, like I'll see sometimes where there'll be people really critical about an executive sold, like the CEO or the founder sold $100 million in stock. But then when you step back, it's like the person's worth $6 billion and 99.9 is tied up in this company that they started 15 years ago, and they're like an immigrant and they grew up poor, and like just let them sell. Like they're selling, like you said, like less than 1% of their holdings or whatever. It's like it's not that big of a deal. Like it's like, so like let the person buy a house or whatever. Let them buy their yacht.
I largely think it's noise, and this is just where I have my bread and butter, where Wall Street misses. And analysts might say this is the amount of insider selling and this is the amount of insider buying. But to me, it's so much more nuanced. That all that insider selling came from a 20% shareholder selling down to 10%, that doesn't matter. If it's just a CEO, when you really study the issue nitty gritty, that's where you can get a lot of value. And I just see it kind of over and over again, where to me, the way the bear cave generates an edge for the readers is kind of going one step further than what you traditionally see on Wall Street.
With selling shares, like if management is selling shares and also resigning, also a huge, like combining multiple things together.
Yeah, or more importantly, to me, a resignation effective immediately. After someone resigns, they don't need to disclose their share sales. So, if an executive stays but sells half their stock, people view that as a huge red flag. But to me, a much, much bigger red flag is if they resign effective immediately, and then they didn't have any history of selling stock, but now they're going to be free to sell the stock.
Like the entire position
without disclosure. So there's all these nuances where people, one example that comes to mind that's going to be relevant for your tech audiences is Larry Summers, the former Secretary of the Treasury, big guy, knows how governments think, understands the finance ecosystem. He resigned from the board of Square earlier this year, effective immediately after just 12 years. And then Jack Dorsey, the CEO.
Wait, 12 years?
Yeah, after a long period of time on the board. I think he was on the board before they were even a public company. Larry Summers, long history on the Square board, resigned effective immediately earlier this year. A few weeks later, there was articles about whistleblowers coming forward at Cash App regarding money laundering practices, and Jack Dorsey's throwing him shade. To me, this is the most egregious, worst case scenario ever. You got the one adult in the room who understands money laundering, who understands the Treasury, who understands government regulators. He's resigning effective immediately on bad terms. And, just investors don't pay attention to that. They'd rather say, oh, the insider selling or buying is whatever. And if you look at insider buying people view as a huge bullish flag. But over and over again, we've seen people smart people buy their stock and be wrong. CEOs sometimes drink their own Kool-Aid too.
Yeah, that's fair. And then, so with the bear cave, so you kind of got some, heat, momentum, you're getting some notoriety, and you're like, all right, I'm going to start a newsletter. How did that go? How did those next couple months go starting the newsletter?
So I originally started the bear cave in February 2020, because I needed a job. I was graduating college. I had interned at this hedge fund, Sophos, all 4 years. They were in the process of shutting down. So the natural place I would work, I couldn't work for. And I was talking to a lot of New York City hedge funds. It's just, I think it's very hierarchical. It's cookie cutter. It's like, you're going to get this role, you're going to model, and you're going to do this work for us and research what you want. And I wanted a lot of independence. And I thought if I could show I'm smart through this newsletter and build up a following and put out smart ideas, somebody's of course going to want to hire me. So it really started as a way for me to get hired, not as a way for me to make money. So I started that, and it was just me summarizing what's going on in the short world. I realized it's tough for me to track all the short sellers. I'm sure it's tough for other people to track the short sellers. So I'm just going to summarize each new activist short report, link to interesting content, highlight some interesting tweets. And right away, it started resonating. And I was lucky. February 2020 was the best time ever to start a newsletter because it was 1 month before the pandemic. And in the pandemic, everyone was bored. Everyone was online. Everyone was on Twitter. Everyone had extra time and was looking stuff to read. So it just starts growing. I'm tweeting it out. I reached out to every single college investment club in the US and told them about it. I'm cold emailing people in my network. I had a little bit of a Twitter following at the time, maybe 5,000 people. And I individually DM'd over 3 days, each and every one.
Whoa, okay.
I remember my eyes were hurting looking at the screen for so long. I needed to take breaks every 30 minutes just to go outside. And all I did is send on, and that really helped get an uptick. So it can be tough to get a little bit of traffic at first, but Twitter is going. And once you get the first 1,000, if the content's good, I like to say it kind of grows on its own. So that is the early stages. Then I got lucky where in October of 2020, people were telling me, you should charge for it. We'd pay for this. So I launched a paid tier. My first article was on a company called Celsius Holdings, which, ended up...
They've actually done really well, yes.
It's actually my biggest failure is my first paid article. But on the day I published, the stock reacted very harshly. It fell 10%, and it got a lot of attention. I think it went to 60K ARR after that, just that first article. And within 6 weeks, it was 100K ARR, which was unheard of for that somebody with no formal background in media has now a $100,000 a year publication 6 weeks into launching paid. So a lot of people say, I had a ton of struggles. It was a huge mess. These are all the things. For me, it just worked great from the start, and I'm really lucky. And I wish I could say I had to churn for years to make it work, but no, it just right away it was a full-time income and very healthy. And in terms of what made it grow, I've studied a lot of newsletters. I talked to a lot of newsletter authors. One of the best ways to grow newsletters is just doing podcast appearances.
Oh, there you go.
I accept every podcast invitation I get. Obviously, The Peel is my favorite podcast, Turner. But, and the thing with podcasts is you can't oversaturate yourself because each time you tap into a new audience. So you can do 1,000. And every time you're tapping into a new audience, the podcast host's audience, and it's the type of relationship where if somebody listens to a podcast of you for an hour, I think they're likely to say, oh, I like this guy. He's smart. I want to sign up for this newsletter. And maybe I'm willing to pay for it because I think it can get value. You don't get that by somebody who sees a single tweet or even maybe a single media article. But a podcast is uniquely a great way to tap into new audiences and potentially get a close relationship with the reader. So the most successful Substack newsletter I know, Doomberg, which is doing millions of dollars a year on ARR, I talked to them, and the best advice they gave me is they said, we gave up on Twitter, we gave up on everything else. Our two growth strategies are produce great content, and we try to do 100 podcasts a year.
100?
It's not the more complicated than that. And I really do think accepting every podcast invitation is key, even small podcasts where you might not get a lot of growth, because then you can test out your answers. It's almost used as a practice run or rehearsal for the bigger podcasts. It's fun. You learn, you network. I think starting a podcast is great too. I tell college students, I think my best advice if I were you is try to start a podcast in a niche, because if you reach out to a really successful person and you say, hi, I'm a college student, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes with questions? They'll almost all ignore the email or say no. But if you say, hey, I am a college student, I have this podcast, can I interview you, and ask you the same exact questions, they'll say yes. They'll be flattered. You don't just get to ask the questions and get answers. You have a byproduct you can produce. It creates a network. It like increases your luck surface area in these huge ways. So I think podcasts are great on both sides for trying to grow a newsletter or being a host to try to network.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, it's essentially why I started it. I mean, I think I was telling you before we started recording, I've been thinking about it for a long time. And I kind of had this like reflection where my episodes, they get an average of like 5 to 10,000 kind of listens, views, streams, just across all the platforms. And if you think about like 5 to 10,000 people, it's like a full arena of people listening. So when you're thinking about, networking and getting to know someone, it's like, hey, Edwin, want to go hang out in like Madison Square Garden? I'll like ask you a bunch of questions. It kind of makes it a little bit more sexy than just like, let's go grab coffee and I want to pick your brain or whatever. So I agree, but I'm biased, I guess, on how powerful it is. How do you make money with a newsletter? Like just generally, like what's the business model? Like what have you found works best? What doesn't work? Maybe you kind of already hit on that, but.
So with the newsletters, there's really two ways to make money. You can do ad deals or you can do paid subscriptions. Broadly speaking, that's how most people do it. I don't do any ads. I do just paid subscriptions through Substack. And, my newsletter, just to go through some numbers, there's about 65,000 people who read the Bear Cave on the free list. There's about 1,000 who read it on the paid list. It costs about $640 a year. I launched it at $340 a year or $34 a month, then raised prices to $44 a month or $440 a year. And now I've raised it to $640 a year and it's annual only. But all the people who signed up earlier at lower prices were grandfathered in at their lower rates. So not everyone pays $640, but most do. And so that's how I make money, the paid readership. What helps is Twitter. I think having a Twitter presence, getting a lot of new eyeballs through Twitter, you want to have a relationship with your reader. You don't just want to be a random email that arrives in your inbox. So Twitter is great. Being friends with other newsletter authors is huge, where I think people don't like transactional. If you say, I'm going to give you a shout out in my newsletter and you shout out mine, people will read through it and that's not a good way to grow. But if you're genuinely friends with other newsletters and I link to somebody else's content that's good and they link to my content, that's a great way to get new subscribers. Substack has a great recommendation feature where I can just recommend other newsletters I like and they recommend me. That's a great way to get growth. Podcasts, I think, are the biggest thing. Every and any podcast is a great way to grow. Earned media is a good way to grow. I try to get media coverage for anything I write about, especially if it moves the stock and there might be an article or two about it. But the best way to grow, and the one that's not talked about enough, is just produce good content. That is just what works. It doesn't, if your content's bad, what doesn't work is everything else if the content is bad. Even if you get readers, you're never going to get someone else to pay for it. Versus great content, if you have no growth strategy and 2,000 readers and just have the best content ever, it will succeed eventually. It might take more time. It might be even more successful if you do the publicity focused stuff, but it will succeed if you have great content and at least a few thousand people on your email list. And in terms of how I make money, so Bear Cave paid subscription model, the free people get this weekly email every Sunday where I summarize new activist short campaigns. I look through the executive resignations every week. There's about 300 or so executives who resign every week from public companies. I'll look through all of them and try to find the 5 or 10 most suspicious, or there's a pattern of suspicious resignations. I'll link to a few articles and I'll highlight some interesting tweets, especially on specific companies that could be good shorts. So that's the free version that goes out to about 65,000 people every Sunday. And then twice a month for the paid subscribers, I'll do my own analysis on a company that I feel is misleading investors or harming customers. That's when I'll say problems at XYZ company. Here's a $1 to $10 billion public company. I expect to do badly in the future. And here's the reasons why. Here's my roughly 2,000 word analysis. So not super long, on a company that I feel like could be a good short candidate. And this is research. This is an article that could help you hit the ground running. So that's more or less how I make money. I have a side project I started called Idea Brunch, where twice a month I'll interview an interesting investor. And the first half of that interview is the written interview is free, and then the second half is behind a paywall. That's been surprisingly successful. It's not huge. It's 11,000 people on the free. It's our 50K ARR, again, through paid subscriptions. I like to joke with people, the huge value of a newsletter isn't just the subscription revenue, it's the relationship with your audience. So you have this audience of generally very high income earning people who are smart, who think you're smart, who like you. And most businesses like that, they start cross-selling different things. For some reason, newsletter authors, I think so far I've had some trouble building huge businesses off the backs of their newsletters, but I don't expect that to be the case forever. I know you talked about Newcomer in your past podcasts, and he does a lot of events. I don't really have a desire to do that, but I do think I could use my newsletter as a founding board to launch other products. I tried to create a job board for investors where I noticed a lot of funds, especially small funds, they post job opportunities to Twitter for internships and analyst roles. And I thought maybe I can make a central job board and everyone posts that and students go to find that. That didn't work.
Do you know why it didn't work?
Yeah, well, there's a few reasons. First, and I didn't expect this, Turner, I thought it was a great idea. First, job-related keywords in newsletters increase the spam rate. I hate it when my newsletter goes to spam folders. If you look at your spam, actually, there's going to be a lot of things. You earn $15,000 a year, this job. The moment I start talking about job boards and free and on all these things, the open rates go down because it's going to people's spam folders. And I don't want to jeopardize my main publication promoting a side project. So that's one unexpected thing that sometimes you just don't know it until you do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought.
I think you need to get a lot of momentum right away. And I kind of have this approach of I'll build it and we'll slowly build it up. But if there's not enough momentum on both sides, then it doesn't work. And I just maybe didn't have as big of a publicity push as, I have now as I did 2 years ago. So I think one person actually found a job through the job board, but now if I were to do it again, I would really lay out how am I going to get a ton of eyeballs in it in the first 2 weeks from all the college students. And I want to launch with at least 30 jobs or so from people. I think if I had more outreach to funds and had them promoting it on there, that could have been better. It's just, if you have 5 unique jobs and you're just tweeting it out, it just, on both sides, I wasn't good at cultivating enough demand to making it work. But I didn't lose anything. I just used a white label service. I probably spent $1,000 and 100 hours on it in total, and no big harm there. Another thing I'm experimenting with is I think there's a lot of value. There's a lot of room to improve surveys. So hedge funds spend a lot of money on expert networks where you want an expert advice on an issue. You might be looking at a drug and you want a doctor to tell you if it's going to work or not, or the market size. You're looking at a steel industry supply chain and you want to know about a change in like electricity prices or whatever. But there's a lot of times where you want non-expert insights. I want to know if Abercrombie and Fitch is going to still be popular. Do I want to speak to a fashion expert or do I want to speak to a dozen college students? I'd prefer a dozen college students. I want to know if Celsius is a good drink. I want to know if Bumble is going to overtake Match or Hinge. Those are questions that are best answered by the consumer, the college students, rather than an industry expert. So there's not a good way for hedge funds to get youth or non-expert insights on things. And, traditionally SurveyMonkey is the way to go. If you look at the IPO documents for SurveyMonkey, their largest customer was actually a shareholder, Tiger Global. And they disclosed that Tiger Global was spending $2 million a year on SurveyMonkey questions. The largest customer, all they're doing as part of their investment process is creating these SurveyMonkey. So I started experimenting with SurveyMonkey and I was very dissatisfied. It's expensive. It's slow. A lot of the answers are low quality. So I've been tinkering with this idea that I could use my audience on both sides to help create a survey company where, another issue with the surveys is you can't follow up to people. What I want to do is create a survey, get 100 written answers to something, find the 5 smartest and follow up with them. But right now with SurveyMonkey, you can't even do that. It's so silly. How can you not follow up with the smart people you want to talk to? So I think there's room for a next generation survey company that'll use people with verified email addresses that you can reach out to once they give responses, something to connect hedge funds and investors to college students in the market who can provide non-expert insights on companies. Why can't I, as a hedge fund manager, pay $300, have a app on my phone where I type a question. It sends out text message to college students who get paid $5 a reply, and I get all the replies within 30 minutes. I mean, well, why can't I pay $1,000 to some company to give me a Zoom call with 10 college students later today? College students are short on money. College students would be happy to do anything for money and ask questions. Like, why can't I do that? I want to build a company that does something with connecting the youth insights to the investment management in a better way than SurveyMonkey. And I've started to toy around with that. It was getting a lot of good traction. It's going to be easier to relaunch once the school year starts and college students are in school rather than in the summer. So that's another way I want to use my newsletter platform to grow. And the final thing I've started to experiment with in terms of newsletter economics, Turner, is even though all my revenue comes from paid subscription, I have this huge base of 98% of people don't pay for my publication because I have so much free content out there, and I don't want to put more behind the paywall now because it would hurt growth. I want to maybe start doing affiliate deals where I find 3 or 4 products I really like, recommend them to people and say, I use them. This is great research tools. And if people click my affiliate links, I'll get a 20-30% commission for life. I've started to experiment with that a little with moderate success, but it's still less than 1% of my revenue. So for now, it's all paid subscriptions from hedge funds, but I'm really optimistic, not only that my newsletter can grow in the future, but that other newsletters can grow. I really think we're in like inning 1 of paid newsletters.
Wow. Inning 1. Okay. Interesting. Well, so I have 2 interesting comments based on what you just said. So the stat about Tiger being SurveyMonkey's largest customer is amazing. And I actually remember, so I'm an investor in a company called Be Real. They ended up getting acquired a month ago. Tiger was looking at one of the rounds, and I just remember they showed me all this college student data that they had. And I was like, nice. Like, this is kind of interesting. I guess you guys kind of went a little overboard here, but like pretty cool that you got so much feedback on the product from these college students. So it kind of checks out that they were the largest customer. And then on surveys. So my mother-in-law, she has a PhD in survey research methodology, which is how do you design and deliver a survey in like the most effective way to get the most unbiased answers, the best data quality, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely a thing of like high quality data from surveys, kind of an untapped market.
Oh, absolutely. Why can't I see who exactly is answering? What I want to do is anytime a person answers, they use their college email address so I can see who they are. They're a real person, and this is where they go. This is the basic demographic info. I think when you pay people for surveys, as a lot of SurveyMonkey surveys do, it's just lower quality because you get people who just are filling out nonsense to get their $2 at the end of the survey. I don't want it to be paid. I want it to be a selling point to students. Fill out this and you get attention. You maybe a fund will reach out to you. Maybe they do get paid for some things like Zoom calls. Maybe you can do more of a lottery style where you say, hey, one person gets a $500 gift card and we'll give it to somebody who has high quality answers. Then it changes the quality dynamics. I don't know why SurveyMonkey doesn't do that. I have an idea where I want to embed the surveys that hedge funds want answered as part of a broader newsletter catering to college students. So I'll have a free newsletter for college students that talks about finance, all the open roles, tracks the stock pitch competitions, shares educational content. And part of the newsletter is just surveys they can fill out for free or a potential internship or one chance to win a gift card. And then it's going to be like reciprocity. I'm creating a newsletter that's useful for you. You help keep the newsletter alive by filling out surveys for me every once in a while if you're bored. And you might win a gift card and you might get on the radar of a fund that'll reach out to you. Why doesn't this exist? You're going to get such high quality answers. You're going to have such a moat over SurveyMonkey. I think there's an opportunity to build a real business there. And because I have a huge audience with the Bear Cave, I've already got a few hundred college students on my email list. I have a bunch of fund managers who have like some level of interest. Basically, having a newsletter in the audience gives you a springboard to do all these experiments at such an easy way where you just couldn't do it. It would take a year to get where I can go in a day just having a newsletter.
And paying so much money too. Like if you think of you want to get something in the inbox of 65,000 people or whatever, like that's a big ask. Like it's a valuable touch point to have with someone.
All I needed to do to get a few hundred college students filling out surveys is look at the Bear Cave, look at every .edu email, send an email to them and be like, hey, be part of my survey experiment. Would really appreciate it. And, a few hundred people are. So easy. For a startup, you need it's just such a mess. So it gives you an audience that you can try to. I'm really a big fan of newsletter authors trying to use their audience to build companies. I think we're going to see a lot of people do it successfully over the coming years.
So I want to kind of move a little bit into like some case studies. I know you've written a lot about a lot of different companies. One that I think is fascinating, that's probably a good case study of kind of what you do, is Planet Fitness. Can you just kind of tee up Planet Fitness and then go into just kind of like your process with that and what all you found?
So Planet Fitness, I wrote on them a year and a half ago, and everybody knows Planet Fitness as the really cheap $10 a month gym company. And why are you going after this gym that's so affordable, trying to keep people healthy? And the obvious issue with Planet Fitness is it's really easy to sign up for a Planet Fitness membership, and it's really tough to cancel. And, really tough is a subjective, all gym memberships can be tough to cancel, but Planet Fitness takes it to another level. So Planet Fitness, you can sign up for a membership in any way, but you can't cancel over the phone. You can't cancel online. You can't cancel in the email. You can't cancel in app. You can only cancel by going in person to the Planet Fitness you signed up at. So right away, that's a little tough. That's their policy. That seems pretty aggressive. And I see a lot of complaints online about Planet Fitness being tough to cancel. So I go to all the state AGs, start filing FOIA requests, and I get more complaints on Planet Fitness than in any company I've ever seen. It's crazy. What you'll see is people say, I go to Planet Fitness. I drove there to try to cancel because I couldn't cancel over the phone. And they just refused to cancel. They said, today's the payment processing day. Come back some other day.
What?
I was a college student and I signed up and I moved out of state. And so now I can't cancel it. And they won't let me and I keep sending letters asking them to cancel.
Oh, because you have to go to the location that you signed up at.
Well, that's their policy. And then what they say as an exception to the policy is you can send a letter if you've moved out of state and you forgot to cancel your gym membership. And people are sending these letters, but the company, of course, just says we never received the letter. A woman sends 3 letters and she says, well, the person told me that they have too many letters in the back and they can't find mine, so I should just send another letter. And she sends a certified letter and she includes a copy of the certified letter she sends after her 3 other letters. The company still doesn't cancel her subscription. They'll say it's canceled, but then they'll realize they keep getting charged and they don't get canceled. And the thing with Planet Fitness is it's a franchise model where their 2,000 or so locations are owned by franchisees who have a huge incentive to just not cancel because it's free money. And normally what you see, Turner, in businesses that aren't canceling subscriptions or are tough to cancel is they get a lot of credit card disputes. And generally, if your credit card dispute rate goes over 1% or 2%, that's very, very problematic. Credit card companies take that seriously, and you could be banned from processing.
As a vendor, they'll no longer process your payments.
Yeah, it's credit card disputes. You lose like $50 or $75 anytime someone disputes a credit card payment. Even if you win, there's a fee for just getting a dispute. And if you get too many, it's just huge penalties. You're going to need to either pay hugely increase. It's a big problem to get a lot of credit card disputes. So Turner, I'm going to ask you a question. Planet Fitness has around 2 million members, okay? They have all these payment issues. I'm describing it as really tough to cancel. Guess how many credit card disputes Planet Fitness has had among their 2 million members in the last year?
I mean, a couple thousand, 10,000? I mean, I assume... it's probably higher because of the way you just teed this up, but...
That's a fair guess. The actual answer is 0. Because Planet Fitness doesn't let you sign up with credit cards. They make you use a debit card or direct account ACH. And what they do is they say it's for the continuity, so your credit card doesn't expire, safe fees, whatever. The real reason, and you see this across businesses that have scammy billing policies, is because they want to be able to bill you without your consent. Because credit cards have an easy dispute mechanism. Direct account, not easy to dispute if they're taking it from your debit card or direct from your bank account. So you look on credit union, if you look at Planet Fitness videos criticizing them, oftentimes the top comments on YouTube are people at credit unions catering to low-income consumers saying, look, one of the biggest reasons people shut down their credit union accounts is just because they can't get Planet Fitness to stop billing them.
What?
And then they just shut it down and reopen an identical account because that's how they get Planet Fitness to stop. Planet Fitness caters a lot to low income demographics. And oftentimes, unbeknownst to them, they'll be stuck in a 1 or 2 year contract. So you might be, I say some people are too poor to pay the $10 a month, but they're too poor to cancel because Planet Fitness charges you $200 to buy out your contract. So you're stuck you keep getting hit with overdraft fees because they keep taking your account down to zero and they just over and over and over. And you can't get them to stop. It's people are going to $1,000 of fees and debt just because of a Planet Fitness gym membership. And if you look at Planet Fitness, a lot of the business is around signing up people who don't go to the gym. So Planet Fitness, their whole model is to find people who are beginning weightlifters. They don't want people who consistently go to the gym. So they have a lot of cardio. They don't have a lot of free weights. Their free weights max out at about 60 pounds. They do everything. They ban like tank tops, and they're very much for the beginner. And they say it's because it's inclusive, but I think it's because they want people who don't go to the gym. If you look, Planet Fitness sponsors the New Year's ball drop, and they have the big purple hats on because they want people's New Year resolution to start going to the gym, because those people sign up and then they never go and they never cancel, and you need to go in person to the gym to cancel. So you're instead just paying $10 a month for a gym membership you never use. So I like to joke, is Planet Fitness really a gym company, or is it an illegal billing operation with gyms on the side? And other issues are it's very oversaturated. You'll have a Planet Fitness literally a 5-minute block from another Planet Fitness. I don't think it's all it's cracked up to be. And even though Wall Street loves to model it and say it's really profitable, yeah, it's very profitable to have a ton of people who you bill who don't want to pay for your product, who never use it. But, if everyone was going to the gym at this rate, they would just be overcrowded. And a big priority of regulators and the Biden administration is combating tough to cancel subscriptions. Regulators have this argument that it should be as easy to cancel subscription as it is to sign up for it. And I broadly think that makes some sense. And Planet Fitness is going to be the number one company hurt by that. Even as we see more and more fintech companies are making it easy to dispute debit card transactions and fight back there, I think it's just, this is a business not poised for success. If you look, the CEO and CFO both resigned recently. A lot of the franchisees have issues. And I just see stuff at Planet Fitness that I see at no other public company. Normally, when I look at the FOIA records, when a consumer reaches out to the state attorney general, sometimes the state attorney general forwards out complaint to the company and the company responds. And normally it's very professional. They have good answers. The lawyer's writing it. With Planet Fitness, it's literally like a 23-year-old like staff member at the franchisee, just the most immature, silly responses. Oh, like, I'll look into it. We have a lot on our plate, state attorney general. It's crazy to me. I really think, if you look at the CEO's resignation email, normally people say, I'm leaving to spend more time with my family, no disagreements. As an exhibit to the 8K where the CEO resigned, it's some like drunken rambling with a lot of typos, complaining about the new leadership. It's crazy. And there was a Business Insider article about how the CEO might have like an alcohol problem. There's a lot of oddities around Planet Fitness where it's this national brand, cheap gym, getting people healthy. And then the underbelly of it is millions or billions of dollars of illegal billing, lots of cultural issues, and just a company that's worth a lot less if it was run ethically.
Wow, it's almost sad when it truly is an illegal billing operation. Kind of sad that exists in the first place.
But it's hurting people who don't have a huge voice. It's hurting low-income consumers. I see that a lot with businesses where if they were doing this to wealthy demographics, it would be over in a day. But if they're doing it to people who just aren't as good at advocating for themselves, then it can go on for a lot longer.
Man, on that note, the company Herbalife?
Yeah, I was obsessed with it in high school, Turner.
Okay, so I'm a little bit familiar. So I interned at a company called Amway. So I'm like a little familiar with like how those companies work. Me and my wife have this game. So Herbalife's new business model is to like get people to open up these cafes or these smoothie shops and like basically purchase and then sell the product in the shop and then get other people to sign up. It's a pyramid scheme, for lack of a better way of describing it. our game, when we see like some new kind of like cafe or smoothie shop, we always try to figure out, is it an Herbalife? And like, sometimes it'll take like a couple minutes, but then you find it and you're scrolling through the Instagram and you like see in one of the pictures a part of one of the bags of like the packaging, and you're like, oh my God, it's an Herbalife bag. Or like you'll read the reviews for the cafe on Google reviews. It's always really fascinating with that one. That's one of the other interesting ones.
And again, low income, Spanish speaking demographic, they can get away with bad conduct.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was a super high profile case, like with Bill Ackman, was like, the evidence was like pretty clear. It kind of felt like of what was going on, and just, I don't know. I think some stuff happened. Like they got fined and stuff, but like the business is still operating.
Yeah. And if you look at Bill Ackman, set the stock down 50% in a day. It more than recovered. Regulators fined them, but did not call them a pyramid scheme, but they needed to change their operations. But now Herbalife is at all-time lows and actually doing very poorly, of course, after Ackman covered his short. So these things can take a very long time to play out. And oftentimes it isn't the fine from regulators that causes the problems. It's the changes they need to make to their business. That's what really hurts the business in the long run.
Yeah, so like you can no longer cheat your customers, and like it's no longer a good business anymore because you can't.
Like with Planet Fitness, it might be a fine from a regulator and publicity, but what's going to happen is it's just going to be easier for people to cancel, and then you this latent base of 3 million people who are being billed without their consent is going to shrink to 1 million, and those 2 million people who you're charging $100 a year, that's $200 million a year of free money that's going away. That really hurts your multiple and everything.
So another one that you've covered a lot lately that I think is an interesting story is Hershey's. Can you talk us through that case study?
Yeah. So this is the article I get more hate on than anything else, but I watch a lot of YouTube. I'm a big fan of MrBeast, and I saw MrBeast was releasing a new chocolate brand called Feastables, and I started studying it more, and I thought, this is doing really well. I think it's going to get a lot of sales. And he's aggressively criticizing Hershey's in his videos. He's a big audience. And I start to toy around with the idea that Feastables could really put a dent in Hershey sales.
And MrBeast is like the biggest internet personality. Like each video gets like hundreds of millions of views baseline.
He just passed 300 million subscribers. He's doing Super Bowl numbers in terms of viewership every 2 weeks. This guy has a huge audience. And if you look at Hershey's kind of uniquely among many of these big food conglomerates, $40 billion company, huge multiple, investors love it, very safe stock is the perception, but they're almost all US based and it's almost all chocolate. And the majority of their sales are Hershey's and Reese's and a few other chocolate brands. But it's not super diversified, which is fine, but it also makes them potentially threatened by new competitors. And there hasn't been a huge innovation in the chocolate space for a very long time. Now, Feastables is coming in. They're taking up shelf space right next to Hershey's. He's got a guy who's catering to a lot of Hershey's target demographics. Is it eventually going to put a dent in Hershey's sales? I think absolutely. And Wall Street just doesn't see it that way. Ballpark numbers for Feastables, as far as I can tell now, from media reporting and the like, is roughly $500 million a year in sales for Feastables. Hershey's is doing $10 billion. So is it going to put a huge dent now? I think we might maybe start to see a 1 or 2% volume decline. And especially as Feastables is growing hundreds of percent a year, it's gone from 0 2 years ago to 500 million a year today. They just announced a new formula for it. That's, I think, a big improvement. And I think the product is very good. He's really starting to promote it hard now. I think MrBeast is only going to continue to grow. What happens if Feastable, as I believe it will, becomes $1 billion or $2 billion a year company in the next year or two? What if it takes $1 billion of sales from Hershey? Hershey goes from the safest stock ever to now declining volumes of 10% a year. That's going to cut the multiple in half, and investors are going to panic. And just no one thinks that can happen, but I really think it's going to happen, especially when you take into account Hershey also has headwinds from these GLP-1 weight loss drugs that make people consume less. That's going to be a headwind. Hershey's also has aggressively taken up pricing, raising pricing 5 to 7% a year for the last 5 years or so. So I don't think they can push pricing up as much as they expect. I think we're going to see big innovation this Halloween. If you're a 12-year-old or you're a parent of a 12-year-old and you're shopping for Halloween candy, are you going to want the Hershey's and Reese's snack bag, or are you going to want the MrBeast snack bag? I think totally. There's going to be so many families that choose the MrBeast. Now, the counter arguments here, people say, Edwin, you're naive. This is a 130-year-old company. It has huge distribution. There's no way Feastables and MrBeast.
Yeah, he's a YouTuber. Like what?
He's a YouTuber, you silly goose. And the reality is, he's in, I think, 40,000 retail locations in the U.S. He's in every Walmart. He's in every Target. He's in most 7-Elevens. Go to your local Walmart or Target. Look at the candy, the chocolate aisle. And I think it's likely you're going to see a Feastables bar right next to Hershey taking up some shelf space. From my understanding, these retailers kind of lag the sales data by like 6 months in terms of how they allocate shelf space. There's like resets every quarter, every 6 months. So when the resets happen, because the Feastables is selling so high, they're going to get more and more shelf space going forward. These things just take a little bit of time. So they already have fantastic distribution. They already have fantastic sales. Then the two other counter arguments are, this is just a fad. Edwin, look what happened to Prime. It's starting to sell off a little. MrBeast is just a fad. He's going to get old. His audience is going to... I think MrBeast uniquely is not a fad. I think if you study him hard, this guy is an N of one. He's the Michael Jordan of content creation. This is a very, very impressive human who spends all his life making great content, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as it has. This guy is, I believe, is going to be one of the most influential people of our time. And I think MrBeast is not like other creators. He's not a fad. He's an N of one. So that's one counter argument. And then the other counter argument you hear from Hershey's people, investors say, Edwin, let's say you're completely right. Let's say this grows. Let's say this takes share. Here's what always happens. Hershey's just buys them. The big competitor buys the small, even if it costs them $1 billion. You know, Hershey's could just buy it and it'll end up being a positive. And they kind of missed the whole point of Feastables. First, they've signaled that they wouldn't even take a multi-billion-dollar acquisition offer today. This is already too big. Two, all their marketing revolves around attacking Hershey's. MrBeast founded Feastables because he had Crohn's disease and he wants a healthier, more pure option in terms of snacks.
Is it vegan technically, like milk-free also?
I'm not sure. I know it only has like 5 or 6 ingredients. I'm not sure if it's vegan or milk-free, but he wanted cleaner ingredients, partly because there's Crohn's disease, and he's just attacking Hershey's constantly in every advertisement. Hershey sucks. Hershey's the worst chocolate ever. Even though we're better than Hershey's, that's not enough, because that just means we could be second worst. Just Hershey's is terrible. If you eat Hershey's, you're a boomer. If you're doing this, especially to like 12-year-old kids, I mean, I'm going to have a terrible perception of Hershey's. Even if he had no sales, just your influential icon, no amount of advertising can counteract that. And as you know, 5 years from now, there's going to be more and more people influenced by MrBeast. The older generations are consuming less or passing away. I just see it so clearly. This could easily be $1 billion or $2 billion a year chocolate brand. A lot of their sales are coming from Hershey's or Reese's. We're going to see Feastables innovate more and more. It wouldn't surprise me. Right now, they have chocolate bars, 7 different SKUs, milk chocolate, peanut butter, whatever. We're going to, I think, eventually see them do a Reese's peanut butter cup competitor, and that's going to take more shares from Hershey's. We'll see what happens, but everybody just discounts this to zero and thinks I'm ignorant and there's no way I'm right. And the more and more I look at it and study it, and I look at every Walmart and Target I pass by, I have so many Feastables. I've had so many people try them with me. I think it's a great product that's going to take share. And one day the market's going to wake up and say, Hershey's, the safest company ever, is now under threat. And the stock's going to get hit hard.
I think when you look at these like CPG, consumer packaged goods companies, and you look at like how they've marketed historically, I think an interesting example is Kellogg's. So you go back like the past, 100 years or whatever. They have these characters like Tony the Tiger with Frosted Flakes, or like Lucky Charms. They've got like the leprechaun guy. It's like the rainbow and the pot of gold. And there's content, and they like pay for commercials in like a show marketed to kids. And it's like, oh, there's this fun tiger that you love. And he's like, you're eating Frosted Flakes with him, and you're like getting really big and strong because you ate this like sugar cereal. Different topic, but like that's the way these things are marketed. All these CPG targeted mostly towards kids, they're like marketed with content. So like MrBeast is a pretty interesting like captive audience almost to just like launch products on top of this content. And like instead of it being an ad where it's like a hard break, where it's like you're watching Dora the Explorer, and that's like a heartbreak. It's like Frosted Flakes commercial. It's literally like the content and the ad is like woven into it. So like as a kid, you're like, it's like even more powerful.
Oh, I 100% agree. You look at a Hershey's commercial in a Super Bowl and it's like corporate and it reaches the same number of eyeballs. But if you love the guy and he's saying, this is my product, this is my business, support this channel by buying this, not only is it reaching the same number of eyeballs, it's 20 times more effective. What one person, older person, emailed me and said, well, can't Hershey's just spend the same amount on advertising to get more eyeballs? And I'm like, you don't get it. You don't understand YouTube. You don't understand the connection he has with people. He is the connection where you want to buy it. You want to support it. I'm never going to buy a Hershey's bar, and I'm just going to buy Feastables. And every kid knows Hershey's is the enemy. They're not going to not be happy if their parent brings Hershey's for Halloween. They're going to be pissed. You're supporting our enemy. Hershey's is for boomers. Don't you understand? It's going to be uncool.
Well, it reminds me like back when I was in middle school, like you get an iPod and suddenly you're cool. Like when I was in middle school was when I think like the very first kind of iPods were coming out and I didn't have one and I wasn't cool, right? So it's like you're sitting around the lunch table you're in 5th grade, 7th grade, whatever. All your friends have these like cool foods and you're eating Hershey's and they're like, Edwin, you're a loser. Like you gotta get Feastables. Like you gotta be cool. So it's like, there's like a social signaling aspect to it with some of these products too.
I could not agree more.
So another story that I think is an interesting one, AgEagle Aerial Systems, that's what it's called. I'm actually not super familiar with that story. I know you wanted to hit on it though. Can you just like explain that whole setup?
So I have a class of companies that I like to say just lack economic substance. And what I mean is, they're just not there. There's no there. So to explain AgEagle Aerial Systems, it's I think February 2021 I wrote on them. And the stock had gone from 0 or pennies to like $20 a share.
Yeah, it was like a $4 billion market cap just based on what I saw in Google Finance. Like,
yeah, it had a big AgEagle Aerial Systems at one point had a big market cap. The stock was rising like crazy. And they claim that they were making next generation drones that could deliver packages and their drones could be used by farmers to monitor fields. They said it would be used by weed growers to monitor next generation delivery drones. And you go to the website, you pull up the SEC filing, and they were doing $40,000 a year in R&D. Not 40 million, 40,000. They had 8 employees.
That's not even a full salary for like a scientist.
You go on Glassdoor and it's just one person saying this is like a science project. It's a complete joke. You try to find a video of their product and it's tough to find. And what you see is it's just a GoPro hooked up to a remote control airplane. It's a nothing. It makes no sense. And you start digging more and there's people who have been charged with the SEC for penny stock promotion involved in the company. None of it is making sense. You know, a lot of their shareholders are overseas and their shareholders have been involved in a lot of other penny stock promotions before. It's just total stock promotion. And you're saying, how is anyone buying this? Why is it going up so much? And there's a lot of retail investor speculation. And I kid you not, there was a report on Wall Street Bets where somebody was saying, look, I know for a fact Amazon they're going to announce an Amazon partnership because I found this unlisted YouTube video that shows the AgEagle logo next to the Amazon logo. I solved the puzzle. Amazon is the hidden partner. And on the conference call, the company would always say, we have a big retail partner. We can't tell you who, but we're excited. So they keep hinting that they have something with Amazon, not putting it explicitly. And you look at this unlisted YouTube video, and it's a channel run by the chairman of the board's granddaughter. And I'm like, so the granddaughter's YouTube channel is having these unlisted videos posted of an Amazon logo next to AgEagle. And people are saying, oh my gosh, they're probably announcing a merger. She was probably working on a project for her father or grandfather doing the logo design. And we figured, I'm like, no, this is not how big corporate partnerships are announced. This is complete nonsense. The company's trying to trick you. They're like laying out breadcrumbs for people to follow down this path of folly. It's completely silly. Amazon in our news article just denied that there was any partnership. It was so obvious they had nothing. And it just needed to be written up. So I wrote it up. Somebody else wrote it up. The stock fell 50% in a day, and it ended up falling 99%. And in these types of situations, there was some borrow and it wasn't that expensive. Usually you see if it's this egregious that it doesn't get this big, or everyone knows it's a scam and it's really tough to short. But in this case, there's nothing there. I know how it's going to end. It's going to end with it going to zero. I'm not 100% sure the path it's going to take. But again, this was peak retail investor mania. This is Wall Street bets. These are the type of things I love to focus on. This is the egregious stuff that needs to be rooted out. People complain about Amazon, whatever. It's a good business that helps a lot of people, in my view. This is stuff that's indefensible. No one benefits except for the promoter. This is really the worst of the worst of the worst. And I'm so proud to write about in the Bear case.
Yeah, the thing I think was interesting was just like the era of SPACs. Like every couple days, there was like a new company was SPACing worth a couple $1 billion or whatever. And it was like zero revenue, but in 5 years, our projections are like billions in revenue. Do you have a favorite from that like era of the markets, like a favorite SPAC setup?
Turner, that's a great question. And I do have a favorite. Embark Technology. I believe their SPAC was November 2021, roughly $5 billion valuation. And I might have alluded to them a little earlier, where they did technology to make trucks self-driving. So they had no revenue at the time, but they said they were working on this self-driving trucking technology that could be used by trucks and revolutionize the space. And there was a few other competitors. And you just look at the documents, and the CEO's name, I believe, was Eric Rodriguez. And not related to the baseball player, and he was 26 years old. And I'm 26 years old. So it's pretty impressive to see a 26-year-old with a huge company, but it's also a little odd. And you look into all the other executives, and they're all very young. And I found out they're all his like roommates and classmates from college. So that's a little odd. Yeah, and normally if you have this situation where you have this very smart young people, you get an adult in the room. You get an adult with a lot of industry experience in the room. And they did that. They hired a big engineer from Tesla, and he left very quickly after just a few months. So that's another red flag. And I start looking into this company more and more, and you look through the SPAC presentation, and the investment bankers are very much trying to show Rodriguez as this genius prodigy, and you should invest in him because he knows what he's doing and he's super, super smart. And one of the things they claimed is that he made the first self-driving electric vehicle in Canada. And I wanted to look into this claim. That's what they claim in the SPAC deck. So he did this, by his trucking software company. And I look into the claim, and what was this self-driving electric vehicle? It was a golf cart. It wasn't an actual vehicle. It was a golf cart in the competition. And it's just everywhere you look, they have a bunch of positive reviews on Glassdoor, but then I realized they were all posted on the same day and posted on the exact day the SPAC merger was announced. So the SPAC merger is announced, and then they tell all their employees, go write these positive reviews. You look, and there's no revenue, and the SEC is sending them these comment letters pushing for explanation of how they plan to generate. It was the most crazy thing ever, where they can't even explain how they're going to get revenue in the future or what their contracts mean. They did this pre-order nonsense, but the SEC was asking them, well, do these pre-orders have a deposit? No. And they said, what's a pre-order without a deposit? It's also silly. And then the biggest red flag is their whole thing in theory is IP by these group of 20-year-old college students, 25-year-old college students. You'd expect to see patents. All their competitors have hundreds of patents. They had no patents, and they say we rely heavily on trade secrets. That's like the exact language Theranos used. It just everywhere you look. I couldn't prove they had nothing, but everywhere you look, it just doesn't make sense, and there's red flags. And, I just wrote it up. I remember one investor called me after and said, well, don't you know the CEO did this and they have these partnerships? I'm like, what's the substance? She's like, how can I independently vet that there's anything there? And of course, there was nothing there. The company never generated a penny of revenue. They fell 99%. I think they were ultimately liquidated at pennies a share. And I remember the CEO had this blog post saying, every employee is going to get severance, and you can even keep the laptops you use to work from home. And I'm like, what this company didn't exist. It was just him and his friends, and they were shipping out laptops to remote employees. And it was just a transfer of cash to this non-existent entity that didn't even do anything as far as I could tell. So you see a lot of that. And that was just the most bizarre one that's funny to me. And I kind of wish somebody did an investigative piece and see what actually happened.
Yeah, actually, letting the employees keep the laptop, like, that's like a nice gesture at the end of the day. It's like, you know what? You guys could just keep all the stuff. Like, you could have screwed people over. Like, at least he's like, hey, like severance, laptops, like.
I mean, but the point is for the investors, it's just like there's nothing ever there in my view.
Yeah, I'm thinking through. I think my two favorites or most memorable. There was one. It was the Smart Windows company. It was like a soft. Do you remember what that company was called?
I think it was View Inc. was one of the smart windows.
Yeah, and it was basically like every single window in the world was eventually going to be like a computer, and the TAM was like trillions of dollars. But I think it had like no revenue when they went public. I'm pretty sure the company doesn't exist anymore. That was one of my favorites. And then the other one was the company App Harvest. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, Bionic Tomato. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like these smart greenhouses in like the Appalachian Mountains, and there was a bunch of stuff. But I remember that my favorite part was Martha Stewart was on the board, and she like did an interview on CNBC, and I think it was either her and the CEO or her and another celebrity, and like you could tell they were interviewing her and like asking her questions, and she'd do the thing where she'd like look at her list to like answer the question. It was like they would like ask her and she would like look down, like remember the name of the company or like remember like the CEO's name and like look back at the screen, and it was like the most obvious, like no idea what's going on. Why do you have Martha Stewart involved? Like, I guess it's like a cooking thing or something, but that was one of my favorites. The App Harvest was an amazing one.
Absolutely. There was a lot.
Yeah, it was a fun time. Just as someone who was like, it was like entertaining to just look at some of these things sometimes, just the crazy stuff that was going public. One thing that I really wanted to get was in terms of like what you do, your process, like how do you think about what you do that's like really unique and just kind of different from maybe some of the other people that are short sellers or they look for corporate misconduct and fraud?
So the biggest differentiating factor for me in the bear cave is I'm very, very good with FOIA. And I made it seem simple. In reality, if you want to get good at it, you need to know the nuances, which states respond fast, which states tend to have the most complaints, what's the best way to word complaints, what do you do if they don't want certain redactions or not. So I think I'm very, very good at navigating FOIA and getting consumer complaints and understanding the company's relationship with their customers. I know which websites for consumer complaints can be manipulated, which ones can't, which ones you pay for reviews. I'm very good at navigating that. So that's a unique edge I have. I think a lot of what I do is just going one step further than the peer group. So a lot of investors will look at who the auditor is for a company. That's fine. But I can use the PCAOB database to not just see who the auditor is, but who the specific audit partner is and what's their track record. And do they have any secret ties to the company? That's one example of going a step further. People will read the articles out on a company. I almost think most of the articles don't have that much value, but the comments sections always have a lot of value. So I don't just read every article. I want to read every comment in the comments. Go to Seeking Out, but ignore the article. I just click on the comments section and read there. There's always one smart guy. There's a joke. You want to know the correct answer to a question? Put the incorrect answer on the internet and someone will correct you. And that's very true at the comment sections on these articles. I don't just read the SEC filings. I use the SEC full text search to see the words in their filings and what's different and what's unique. I don't just look at the resignations. I try to understand the full story and pattern of resignations. I go to their LinkedIn. I see, did they remove their experience from their LinkedIn post? So they take their LinkedIn experience and put it in their education section, which is like a joke saying, I view it as I don't like the company.
I've seen that before. Yeah.
Do they have great descriptions of all their past experiences and none for their bad experience? You can get a lot of info if you just really want to dig in and take all the public info in the domain. I'd spend a lot of time, not just people say, look at the people involved, look at the CEO and their track record. Well, that's too obvious. I want to look at every board member and their experience on other boards, because if you've served on 3 boards that declined 90%, I think your next company you join is probably going to do poorly, with the idea that public market losers continue to lose and public market winners continue to win. It's just like the people you associate with really matters. I don't just skim the Glassdoor reviews. I read each Glassdoor review chronologically. And when you do that, you can see if there's a clump of 5-star reviews on one day, it's like the HR person clearly told them all to, and it's like being manipulated. So going one step further constantly is another way I get an edge. FOIA, going one step further. And then the final thing I say is I'm willing to get information, from the most basic of sources. I think in Wall Street, there's this big push to be sophisticated. We hired an expert and they told us this. We got the smartest person in the world and they modeled this. I think there's nothing wrong with going on YouTube, listening to people talk about their product and their experiences and reading the comment section. There's no shame in going on TikTok and seeing what TikTok people are making about Chegg and whether or not they're going to use it going forward. There's huge value in social media. And I feel like in hedge funds, some of them would laugh you out the room if you said, my big thesis here is just the social media sentiment is very negative and they don't want to continue using their product. Well, did you do it a P out of N2 survey and then with the statistical significance? And I'm like, no, I just want to see what consumers think. And you get the sentiment and, I don't mind if somebody writes an article that makes a lot of sense to me to just borrow heavily from that and do a little bit of my own work and say, look, this person wrote something that made a ton of sense and I just think it needs more attention. There's too much pressure to be novel and genius and not enough on just being simple and straightforward and saying, look, this just makes sense. Like with Chegg, which I wrote on in January and has now fallen 80%, it just look at every one of their customers and they all say they're leaving for ChatGPT. Chegg has a hugely negative brand perception. There's no way to turn the ship around. This is a dead company walking and it's down 80% so far. And I think it's going to go to zero. Nothing fancy there, just straightforward, simple, and it's worked really well.
Yeah, and Chegg is you pay a monthly subscription and you get access to digital textbooks basically for college students.
Well, a homework help. So it used to be digital textbooks. Now it's homework answers. But the thing is, you don't need to use Chegg to get the answer. You can just ask ChatGPT and it gives you the answer. And no, people don't like Chegg. It's, again, very tough to cancel, cancellation flow process. They're doing all these desperate partnerships where you get a Tinder Plus subscription if you get Chegg, but it's not working. And the final differentiating factor to go what makes me unique is I don't take positions. Unlike other activist shorts who bet against the stock, who take a short position, who buy puts, I don't do that at all. I only make money from reader subscriptions, and that means I can be independent, and it means I don't have any pressure to exaggerate. Because if you're an activist short and you have a lot of put options expiring next day or next week, you really want that big single day stock move, and you get it sometimes exaggerating and providing low price targets and being sensational. I have no pressure to do that at all. In fact, I have the opposite, where I want to be understated and build trust with readers. I think that's a long-term edge.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's always good to build very trusting, loyal, happy relationships with your customers, whatever those customers look like. Do you have a favorite short seller or anything on your watch list right now? Just super high level, you're like, this is worth something you're thinking about. Just it's not a very developed thesis yet, but it's hey, maybe something people should look out for.
So I'm a big fan of this Twitter account, Aurelius Value. I think they do a lot of work, good work. Big River Capital is another Twitter account that I think does really good work. I know he's a little controversial in the short world and maybe a little eccentric, but Mark Cajotes, I think, has had a lot of big wins on the short side. I think more of a checkered history on the long side, but on the short side, I think he does very, very good work and is a truly unique and independent thinker. Like David Orr, Citron Research, occasionally I don't agree with them, but I think broadly they get a lot of stuff right. So those are some of the people I like to follow. And in terms of the trends, I look a lot at AI. So Chegg was an easy AI winner. I kind of wonder who else is going to be hurt by AI. Coursera is another one I've looked at in the past. I just couldn't get to that threshold of wanting to publish on them because I thought the business did have some value, but they're struggling. They could be hurt. Duolingo is another one people mention. I think they have a talented CEO, but again, maybe could be hurt by AI. Shutterstock is a fun one that I for the last year, I keep looking at it, but I just can't get there. Some people say that the AI is going to be used to do AI-generated images, so you won't want Shutterstock. The counter argument is Shutterstock's actually making a lot of money by licensing their data, their photo data, to the AI companies as a training set to make photos. And part of me wonders, will AI photos take Shutterstock's business away, or will it just complement them and help it create a new market?
Yeah, it might make it better.
Getty is more historical images. They're insulated from that, but they could hurt call centers. I look at a lot of AI-related companies, and that's a trend. The GLP-1 market, I haven't written a ton on them. I looked at like Medifast, these traditional weight loss companies. Are they going to be hurt by GLP-1s, or will they even maybe long-term be helped? Because if all the fat people are getting skinny on GLP-1s, the people who don't use that will also want to be skinny. Maybe everybody's trying to be healthier. Will Hershey's be hurt by GLP-1s? Will these sugary food companies be hurt by GLP-1s? That's another trend. And then the final one is kind of creator businesses, where Feastables Hershey's, I think, is the first of a big wave we'll see, where people are kind of eaten away by creator or like social media driven brands. Another example might be Monster with Celsius. Celsius got really big on the backs of Instagram partnerships. So I kind of criticized them early on, but now are they going to be an example of building brands on the back of celebrities? I think we're seeing a big trend towards trusting individuals over institutions and big brands. Advertising is changing, where it used to be the big company had an advantage in scale, but now people want to resonate with the person they admire. So those are some high-level trends I look at a lot.
Yeah, the creator ones, I mean, it's definitely relatable. I mean, probably for both of us, but for me, it's like I have an investment firm, or it's like people follow me on Twitter, they listen to my podcast, and they have a startup, and they're like, Turner, like, I want you to invest. Like, I want to talk to you. I want to meet you, which is kind of the opposite problem that a lot of VCs have, where they're like begging, like trying to get in front of the founders. And for me, it's like they're a fan, like they want to meet me. So it's definitely, I think it's hard to state that creator fan relationship if you are not a part of it in some way. So I agree. There's a lot. I think it's going to have a big change on just like different consumer products. It's like just like hard to know what's going to happen. Like, who knew MrBeast was going to launch a chocolate bar, right? Like 3 years ago, not on anyone's radar, but 3 years in the future, it's like, what other ones exist? Like the energy drinks might be, I've heard people state it as commodity products that you basically just like, there's no differentiation for. If you tie it to something where someone has a high affinity for, like, that is an interesting way to compete against like generic commodity products. And then especially like if you're like a mainstream creator, like a MrBeast, he's probably like the most popular. You take a super commodity product that every single person, like everyone eats chocolate, everyone has candy. So you kind of like latch it on in that way. And then there's like different niches. You go vertical, like someone creates, like for you, it's like you create content for people who are investors, and then you build products that are related to investing. And like people are like, it's Edwin guy, like he's pretty smart, like his newsletter, he made this tool, like I'll give it a shot. Like, it works pretty well, I'll keep using it. And then if you don't have the Edwin or the Bear Cave behind you, it's like, how do you compete against Edwin and his like amazing affinity that all his fans have?
Well, thank you. It's very flattering being on here, Turner. We've covered a lot of ground. We talk about chocolate, we talk about MrBeast, we talk about building newsletters, we talk about bad companies. This has been a very fun discussion.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun. Thank you, Turner.
Thank you for listening to The Peel. If you want to support the show, share this episode with a friend and check out our wonderful sponsors in the show notes. If you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes, and you'll get new ones plus the transcripts in your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.